All right, welcome to the Red Team Opsec room here in Try Hack Me. We're gonna be learning all about operations security and how we can apply it as a red teamer, because this is something that you hear a lot about on the blue team side, but the best attacking groups, the best APTs, they're all leveraging this idea of OPSEC and applying it to what they're doing, right? And so just to give the basic rundown of OPSEC, right, we have this triangle here: identify, control, protect, critical information. These are the 5 steps. So first, you need to identify what that critical information is, and then you need to analyze the threats and the vulnerabilities. And from there, you can assess the risks and apply the appropriate countermeasures. So that is what it looks like at a high level. Now let's kind of jump into each one of these things to better understand what that means. So we're going to start with the critical information identification. So here's some examples of what might be critical information, right? The IP of your server. This is an internal IP here. The SSH username, SSH password, any usernames, passwords, and things like that could potentially be harvested by an attacker. Even the answer to some of these things here, because they might be involved in your questions. If you're familiar, when you sign up on a site and you have to answer some special questions in case you ever have to get your account back, like what is your favorite food or your first car, your mother's maiden name, right? All of that, that's now critical information, because if an attacker gets hold of all that, then they could potentially reset your password or something like that, right? And yeah, these are the examples that would come to mind, especially on the blue team side. But for us as red teamers, how does this apply, right? Well, when we're running a campaign, we use a C2 server, so we don't want that IP to be disclosed, right? Because if the blue team got a hold of our IP, our C2 server, then they could block us if we were using it directly, which would PPAD OPSEC, right? That's why you want to use redirectors and things like that. But any of our IPs of our internal infrastructure certainly would be critical information. And well, here we go, right? Our TTP, right? Our tactics, techniques, and procedures, we do not want that to be disclosed. What operating system we're using, anything that could assist the adversary, which that brings it up in another important thing about this, right? In a blue team perspective, the adversary is these APTs or any kind of malicious threat actor, right? Now, as a red teamer, our adversary is the opposite. It's the blue team. The blue team is the opposition for us, right? So we really need to make sure that we keep our critical assets safe from these defenders, from these blue teamers, right? And it goes on about some of these critical assets here, right? We talk about the public IPs, also domain names that our red team is registered, right? Because that is really critical for carrying out our phishing attacks and things like that. Any hosted websites, anything like that would be deemed critical. Now, on the threat analysis side, they link an article from the DoD of how they identify the threat analysis, right? So we're talking about answering questions like, who is the adversary? What are their goals? What are their tactics? So like I said, our adversary as a red teamer is the blue team, and their intentions are to keep us out, right? And we don't always know their capabilities. We don't always know how competent they are, what kind of software detect, like EDR and stuff like that they're using, SIEM. We don't always know like what their capabilities are. How skilled are they, right? What can we get away with? Now, there can also be other third parties that are involved that could be an adversary. So, for example, if we are an attacker, we're an APT, right, and we've infiltrated a company, there might be another APT that's also breached that same company. And so their intentions could be very wide-ranging. We don't know what their intentions are. And their capabilities also could be very sophisticated as a threat actor. They could be pretty novice. So that could really vary, but those are other adversaries that we definitely need to consider because they could interfere with our operations in some way, right? So the way they define a threat is an adversary with intent and capability. So it's your adversary plus their intent plus their capability. So in other words, what they're saying is that an adversary without intent or capability does not pose a threat as it is defined here. And now the next part is the vulnerability analysis. It's kind of like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, if you will, here. And so to better understand OPSEC vulnerability as related to red teaming, consider the following scenario. If you use Nmap to discover live hosts on a target subnet and find open ports on live hosts, moreover, you send various phishing emails leading the victim to a phishing page you're hosting, all on the same IP address, basically. The vulnerability that you're introducing in that example is that it's a single point of failure. So if the blue team detects that IP address that you're using for multiple different purposes, right? All they have to do is block that, like in a firewall, just blacklist that IP, and then our operations are completely thwarted, basically. So in order to solve that vulnerability, that'll be another piece that we'll talk about in countermeasures, but just understand that if you're using the same IP address for all of your operations or multiple operations, you are introducing a vulnerability. So the way that they are defining a vulnerability in this OPSEC stuff here is not the way that you would typically think of a vulnerability in cybersecurity, where it's it's something that you exploit or whatever. In this example, a vulnerability is something that is the way you're running your campaign is introducing a flaw that the adversary could exploit to basically halt or stop your operations. So that is like the key distinction there. They give another example, if you're using an unsecured database to store the data that you've received from the phishing victims, then, since it's not properly secured, a malicious third-party adversary could compromise it and exfiltrate that data and then use it against you on your client's network. So this is in the first case, the vulnerability is being opened up to be exploited by the blue team adversary. In this example, you are exposing, you're opening up this vulnerability to those third-party actors. Because a lot of times, if you have an unsecured database or something like that, there's people scanning the internet for unsecured databases, and they might just, he might just start coming up in searches and things like Shodan and stuff like that, and then they can just easily exploit it. So you're actually kind of broadcasting to the world that, hey, go ahead and exploit this. It's an unsecured database. So that's where the third-party actors come into play as a threat. So now let's take a look at the risk assessment piece, right? This is the act of actually assessing the risk, right? And finding out where you might be leaving yourself vulnerable. So the first thing is to determine the risk level, right? So here's some things to consider, right? There's a whole NIST documentation on how to properly do this and how to properly identify this from the perspective of organizations, which we could definitely apply to the red teaming stuff as well. So an OPSEC risk assessment requires learning the possibility of an event taking place along with the expected cost of the event. Consequently, this involves assessing the adversary's ability to exploit the vulnerabilities. So in this case, assessing the ability of the blue team to exploit our vulnerabilities or these third-party actors to exploit the vulnerabilities, right? So once the level of risk is determined, countermeasures can be considered to mitigate the risk. We need to consider the following three factors. So one is the efficiency of the countermeasure in reducing the risk. Two is the cost of the countermeasure compared to the impact of the vulnerability being exploited. Is it worth it to apply this countermeasure? And three is the possibility that the countermeasure can reveal information to the adversary, which obviously we don't want to happen at all. So with that being said, we can then apply these countermeasures. So going back to those examples before, right, using the same IP for multiple different operations, what we could do is have separate servers for each purpose. So each one serves a single purpose. So if one gets blocked, then it's not going to in any way impact the other operations that we have going on in our red team engagement. So, and then, of course, to the example of the unsecured database, simply following the proper security measures and securing that database would be a countermeasure for that. So pretty straightforward, I would say. And then the last section here, they cover some examples. We could take a look at that just to see it all in action here. So if we go ahead and view the site here, we could see, well, I guess I already saw these in the right order before, but this one, the way this works, it was kind of confusing at first to figure out. But so what it's asking for is it has a scenario here, and then you got to put in 1 through 5 to say like which one it applies to. We'll just do like this first one here. So it starts off by helping you out and saying, okay, this first one here is risks, and the second one is countermeasures. So knowing that their company has assigned a red team will alert the blue team to the incoming attack. The alert happens if the red team is outsourced. However, this won't be new information for the blue team if the red team is part of the company's staff. If the blue team anticipates you, it might affect their alert level, which in turn might affect the accuracy of the results. So this would be describing the risk. And then this next one here, this will depend on the company and the blue team. So the countermeasure will depend on the company and the blue team because, remember, we have to consider their capabilities and their ability to... But yeah, essentially it goes back to the equation from before where the equation for threat, equals the intent plus the capabilities, right? And so the third one here, we would consider the name of the client as critical information. This one would be threat. And then after that, we would look at, we realize we prefer to keep this piece of information hidden from the blue team. This way we can attack while they are going on with their usual routine, vulnerability, and then the client name would be considered critical information. So there's I think 4 or 5 of these, but you get the idea. I'll let you try that for yourselves. That's the exercise it has you do there. And yeah, that's just the wrap up from here. Now we can see how we can take something that is traditionally used by the blue team that can really benefit organizations. We can use that to help secure our red team engagements, our red team operations. So that is OPSEC, Operations Security, and how it relates to red teams. Hopefully you're enjoying this series so far. If you want to keep going on this, we're definitely going to keep making videos as we go through this pathway. And yeah, let me know what you think down in the comment section below if you have any questions. And if you want to get into some more technical content or just catch up on the series, I have those videos on screen for you right now. I'll see you guys right over there. Thanks for watching.